I was sitting at a corner table in a dimly lit bistro last Friday when I couldn't help but overhear the couple next to me. The tension was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. The man was leaning forward, his voice hushed and trembling with what looked like profound sincerity. He reached across the table, gently touched the woman's hand, and delivered the line with the gravity of a Shakespearean soliloquy. "Listen, you're incredible. You've done nothing wrong. It's not you, it's me." For a second, he looked almost proud of himself, as if he'd just performed a grand act of mercy. He stayed there, frozen in that pose of feigned vulnerability, waiting for a thank you for being so noble and taking all the blame onto his own shoulders. But across from him, the woman didn't look relieved. She looked paralyzed. Her eyes were darting around as if she were trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. By claiming all the fault, he hadn't actually spared her. He'd effectively locked her out of the room. It was a fascinating, almost clinical display of emotional hedging. He'd used the world's most famous cliché not as a bridge to understanding, but as a high-tech defensive shield to shut down the possibility of a messy confrontation. To him, it was a get-out-of-jail-free card that preserved his image as the good guy who was simply too broken for her perfection. To her, it was a form of soft gaslighting that denied her the one thing she actually needed: narrative closure. That moment in the bistro perfectly captures the hidden psychological warfare behind those 5 simple words. We tell ourselves we're being kind, but what if "it's not you, it's me" is actually the ultimate act of self-preservation? When we pull back the curtain on this tired script, we find a complex map of avoidant attachment styles, guilt management, and a desperate need to escape without ever having to look at the damage left behind. Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to take this seemingly innocent cliché, "it's not you, it's me," and really pull back the curtain on its true function.
And we're going to be moving far beyond, the Hollywood sentiment or just another story about heartbreak.
Exactly. We're going to explore its deep roots in social strategy, behavioral economics, and even evolutionary psychology. Over the next half hour or so, you'll discover exactly why this vague script is so heavily favored in modern dating environments.
And what complex, sometimes calculating psychological mechanisms are driving people to use it.
Let's unpack this. So let's start right there, in that moment on delivery. When someone says "it's not you, it's me," they often feel like they're performing an act of grace or kindness.
They really do. They think they're being the bigger person.
But if we look at the immediate practical psychology for the person saying it, the initiator, it seems far more calculated. It's really designed as a kind of psychological shield.
That's the perfect way to put it. What's so fascinating is that the phrase is fundamentally a form of emotional hedging, just like in that scene you described.
Emotional hedging. Okay.
Exactly. The person leaving, they internalize the fault entirely. They're essentially saying, "I am the defective party here."
And what does that do?
Well, it immediately and successfully shuts down any room for rational dialogue. There's no negotiation. There's no conflict.
Yeah, go for it.
It creates an immediate, impenetrable emotional wall around the person initiating the break. The conversation is done.
Okay, so if we look at that wall, what's holding it up? What are the load-bearing beams? What specific psychological benefits does this vagueness give to the initiator right then and there?
Well, our research points to 3 really critical functions. The first one is just pure conflict avoidance.
Meaning they just don't want to have a fight?
Exactly. I mean, think about it. If the initiator were actually honest and said, "I'm leaving because you micromanage my life," or "I don't like how you treat the waitstaff."
Oh, that would open a huge can of worms.
It would open the door to an immediate, very messy confrontation. It forces the initiator to start detailing their partner's flaws.
Right.
Which turns the whole breakup into this difficult accusatory trial.
Where the other person is obviously going to defend themselves.
Fiercely. Of course they will. But by blaming themselves, by saying "it's me," they prevent that entire painful, drawn-out scenario from ever happening.
So it's really less about sparing the other person's feelings and much more about sparing the initiator from having an uncomfortable evening.
That's it in a nutshell. They're prioritizing their own short-term emotional comfort over everything else.
Okay, so that's the first function, conflict avoidance. What's the second?
The second function is perhaps even more crucial for their own long-term psychological health.
Yeah.
It's guilt management.
Guilt management?
Yeah. Breaking up with someone, it causes distress. I mean, that's unavoidable. And that distress generates a lot of guilt in the person doing the leaving.
Right, nobody wants to be the bad guy.
Nobody. So by saying, "it's not you, you're incredible," they get to execute the breakup while simultaneously preserving their own positive self-concept.
They get to have their cake and eat it, too.
Pretty much. They get to exit the relationship, inflict all that pain, and minimize the guilt that comes with it. They frame themselves as the good guy, or even this, noble victim who's just too broken to handle the perfection of the other person.
Wow. So they successfully outsource the moral cost of their own action. It's a way to be selfish without actually feeling like a bad person.
It absolutely is. It's a brilliant, if unconscious, psychological maneuver.
And the third function?
The third function ensures finality.
It shuts the door for good.
For good. Think about what happens if you break up with someone by listing their fixable flaws. Let's say you just work too much.
The immediate response is, I can change. I'll work less. I'll quit my job. I'll go to therapy.
Inevitably. And that just drags the conversation out indefinitely. It opens up this whole new chapter of bargaining. But if the problem is declared to be some internal, unfixable flaw in the initiator...
The problem is me.
The problem is me. The break becomes immediately conclusive. The other person is completely disarmed because, well, you can't argue with someone else's internal deficiency. The conversation just ends. There's zero possibility of negotiation.
That whole dynamic just seems perfectly tuned for strategic avoidance. But, the material also suggests that sometimes the phrase is actually a partial truth, right? That it's rooted in deeper internal relationship hangups.
Yes, that's a key nuance we can't ignore.
So when they say it's me, they might genuinely mean it on some level.
They might. I mean, if we look at this through the lens of attachment theory, it's me can be a genuine, if very reductive, expression of a real internal conflict.
And that's especially true for certain personality types.
It's especially true for individuals with what we call an avoidant attachment style.
Okay, explain that a bit.
Well, for someone with an avoidant style, high intimacy, real closeness, deep commitment, it can feel profoundly threatening.
Threatening how?
They often perceive that deep connection as a loss of their personal identity or their autonomy. It's a feeling of being engulfed by the relationship. It's too much.
So when the relationship hits a certain level of sustained vulnerability and closeness, they just panic. They panic and flee, and then rationalize that retreat as a personal failing.
That's the interpretation, yes. Their internal truth, the real feeling, translates to, I am completely overwhelmed by this closeness, I feel smothered, and I have to retreat to feel safe and get my sense of self back.
So they're prioritizing their psychological need for distance over the stability of the relationship.
Absolutely. And in other scenarios, which sometimes are combined with this avoidance, it can be a sincere confession of perceived inadequacy.
You mean they genuinely feel they aren't good enough?
Exactly. The person leaving genuinely feels they lack the emotional maturity or maybe the financial resources or just the stability that's required to meet the high demands of a healthy long-term commitment. And so they exit, essentially to prevent an eventual bigger failure down the line.
Okay, so whether the intent is just pure self-protection or it's a genuine feeling of inadequacy, the consequence for the person being left is still often severe.
Oh, absolutely.
Our sources repeatedly describe the outcome for the recipient as a form of soft gaslighting.
And this is really where the hidden cruelty of the phrase lies. While the initiator might intend to be kind, the lack of specificity is psychologically devastating.
How so?
By denying the recipient narrative closure, the actual concrete, useful why, you leave behind this huge informational void.
An empty space.
A huge empty space. And the human mind absolutely abhors ambiguity, particularly during a moment of acute stress like a breakup. So it immediately rushes to fill that vacuum with invented scenarios.
And I'm guessing those invented scenarios are always worse than the reality. The person is left to assume they must be fundamentally unlovable or broken in some way the initiator was just too polite to mention.
Exactly right. They spend weeks, months, sometimes even years just torturing themselves, cycling through all these hypothetical flaws. Was it this? Was it that? Did I say the wrong thing? This ambiguity significantly prolongs the healing process.
So what's the alternative? What's the information they actually need?
We have to understand that the cliché is nothing more than code for one functional truth. And that truth is, I am no longer willing or able to invest in this relationship.
That's it. It's about investment.
That's it. That specific, unambiguous declaration that is simply a lack of motivation or commitment. That is all the recipient truly needs to start the process of cognitive and emotional divestment. By refusing to give that clarity, the initiator keeps them trapped in this horrible cycle of self-doubt.
That is a very powerful way to frame it. The denial of necessary, actionable information. That's the true psychological cost of using this vague breakup script. This brings us to a major shift in perspective. We've established the immediate psychology of avoidance, but why is this low-effort, vague exit so pervasive in the broader dating ecosystem?
Right. Why is this the go-to script?
To answer that, we have to look at relationships through the lens of transaction costs and behavioral economics. We need to transition from the individual's couch to the market floor.
This is where it gets really interesting. If we start viewing our emotional energy as a finite resource, what our sources call emotional capital, the logic of the low-cost exit becomes, well, chillingly clear.
Okay, emotional capital. So our feelings and energy are like money in a bank account.
In a way, yes. And in modern, atomized, fast-paced environments like major metropolitan tech hubs or cities defined by relentless professional growth, that emotional capital is fiercely protected.
You're suggesting that the emotional transaction cost of having a deeply honest conversation, which might take 2 hours, lead to tears, require follow-up, is simply deemed too expensive.
It is absolutely deemed too expensive. There was this great expanded anecdote in the material about a woman named Elena. She was a high-level data analyst in San Francisco, and she approached dating exactly like she approached market efficiency.
So very analytically.
Very. She had been in a relationship that she categorized internally as, and this is a quote, satisfactory but statistically suboptimal in terms of her long-term goals.
Wow, statistically suboptimal.
I know, right? So instead of dedicating her time and, more importantly, her emotional vulnerability to a necessary but draining conversation about their incompatibility, she just chose the path of least resistance.
Which was?
She sent a brief, friendly text. It ended with a variation of, I need to focus on myself. It's not you, it's me.
She optimized the exit. She prioritized her own efficiency over any kind of shared intimacy or closure.
Precisely. The emotional transaction cost of being vulnerable was deemed way too high, especially when she had to preserve her capital for networking, for her career, and critically, for the next potential partner.
Who, thanks to dating apps, is always just a swipe away, an immediate potential replacement.
Always. And the cliché acts as the ultimate low-cost exit strategy. It allows the individual to preserve that precious emotional capital, moving them immediately toward the next potential connection without the lingering fatigue of a messy, vulnerable confrontation.
That language efficiency capital transaction, it really highlights this wider trend toward the commodification of sexual relations, a trend that's been dramatically streamlined by dating apps.
This is a direct consequence, a direct result of that market mindset. Interactions begin to resemble a series of business exchanges. The people we date are often defined not by their character over time, but by their instantaneous value added.
And that's quantified by things like physical pleasure or social status signals or some other utility.
Yes. And sex itself becomes transactional. We've seen it described as being as easy to obtain as ordering something online. This market mindset just normalizes the idea that if the immediate value proposition isn't perfect, you cut your losses and you move on immediately. No questions asked.
And this search for an instantaneous, perfect value fosters an incredible rigidity in how we assess people, doesn't it? A person is no longer willing to wait for a connection to actually deepen.
They are not. This efficiency mindset encourages really rigid ideas of types and an excessive reliance on superficial deal breakers.
So you're swiping through profiles with a checklist in your head.
Exactly. Assessment is confined primarily to immediate physical appearance or a very narrow checklist of visible success markers. And this often extinguishes the possibility of those deeper, unexpected connections that require patience and time to grow.
People are actively looking for minor flaws.
Yes, as justification for a quick exit. The whole idea is, why should I invest in a 90% match when statistically a 95% match might be just 2 swipes away?
That sounds absolutely exhausting. You're constantly looking for a reason to say no rather than a reason to explore.
It's the fuck yes or fuck no approach, but it's being applied to the very, very first stages of courtship. Because there is this illusion of unlimited choice, the digital catalog individuals become hyper-analytical and wildly selective.
So they're looking for the minor imperfections.
The wrong job title, a minor disagreement about music, a slightly outdated wardrobe. They see these not as minor human flaws, but as irrefutable evidence to justify moving on and saving their emotional energy. If a date is just fine, that's often sufficient justification for a vague, low-cost breakup.
And this whole framework of commodification and low-cost exits, it seems to feed into and even reinforce some very tired gender dynamics and stereotypes.
Oh, it certainly does. This low-cost exit market really feeds into the idea of a strict gender binary. You see the rise of the fuckboy persona, for example, which is essentially a man who embraces a purely carnal identity precisely to gain emotional insurance. He's maximizing his physical reward while achieving zero emotional vulnerability.
Wow.
He's reducing his risk of ever incurring a high emotional cost breakup. He can't get hurt if he never invests.
And if he's embracing that purely carnal persona, then that automatically forces the woman into the opposite role, the hyper-emotional, commitment-seeking one.
Precisely. It reinforces a completely fallacious binary, where men are carnal and emotionally detached, and women are the emotional gatekeepers.
Which, of course, ignores the reality that women also often desire casual sex and emotional detachment.
Completely. We saw this powerful statement in the source material from one woman who said, and I'm quoting here, "Sometimes we just want to get it in too. We don't want to marry you."
Right.
But the low-cost, vague exit script, which implies the relationship must end because of some deep, emotional, unfixable reasons, it just reinforces the very stereotypes that maintain these rigid roles. It makes it harder for both sexes to be honest about what they actually desire.
This market-driven environment leads us directly to the concept of the evolutionary mismatch. The sheer volume of choice that's offered by digital dating, this digital catalog, it creates a deep conflict between our ancestral wiring and our modern environment.
It's a huge conflict. I mean, if you think about ancestral life, our brains are wired for pair bonding within small, stable tribal groups.
Right. You knew everyone. Your options were limited.
Exactly. And in that environment, choosing a mate was an incredibly high-stakes decision because options were so limited and loyalty was paramount for survival. A breakup carried an immense social and survival cost.
But the modern digital market is the complete opposite.
The complete opposite. It presents an artificial, endless catalog of options, which fuels the motivation for what we call hypergamous recalibration.
Hypergamous recalibration. Let's break that down.
It's the drive to constantly seek a higher value match. So someone is a good partner, but their mate sees a dozen profiles that appear to offer more status, more resources, or more attractiveness. That vision of constantly upgrading becomes biologically and psychologically very compelling.
It's the grass is always greener effect, but on steroids.
On digital steroids, yes. Our ancestral instincts tell us that seeking a higher value match is beneficial for our long-term fitness. The digital environment just exaggerates this drive by making all the alternatives hyper-visible and immediately accessible.
So when a partner, let's call her Sarah, suddenly ends things with the vague script, "It's not you, I just need to focus on me," she's often navigating this very process.
That's a great way to see it. Her hypergamous drive, which is constantly being stimulated by the digital catalog, encourages her to seek a higher value mate.
And this is where the vague breakup script plays its crucial role, right? It acts as the moral justification for this rapid replacement strategy.
It serves to demoralize this rapid partner switching. Our ancient instincts, they impose a cost for abandoning loyalty. There's a deep-seated guilt there. But the vague script allows the individual to bypass that guilt.
So it's a psychological hack?
It's a psychological mechanism that helps the modern person navigate the mismatch between their ancient social hearts, which were built for small tribes and high loyalty, and a technological culture that prizes constant replacement and maximizing individual short-term gain. The empty phrase acts as the psychological bridge over that moral gap, enabling calculated selfishness while minimizing the internal emotional consequence.
The efficiency and the emotional protection of the exit script are just. They're perfectly designed for the sheer volume and speed of today's mating market. Let's step deeper now into those evolutionary roots. When you look at breakups, maybe we should see them less as personal failures and more as potential adaptive strategies for improving our long-term fitness.
Right, this is the core of the mate-switching hypothesis.
And it's a critical reframing.
It is. The mate-switching hypothesis posits that we humans possess these built-in psychological adaptations that are designed to continuously and often subconsciously monitor our current relationship for costs and benefits.
It's like a running tally in the back of our minds.
It is. And breakups are the behavioral outcome. They're often triggered when that cost-benefit analysis shifts dramatically.
So what are the primary inputs? What are the adaptive problems that trigger this internal calculation to switch mates?
Researchers consistently identify three core triggers. The first is a straightforward decline in the current partner's mate value.
And how does that happen?
It often happens because the current mate begins to incur costs that weren't apparent early on in the relationship. We call this a heavy relationship load.
Okay, so they might reveal concealed flaws.
Concealed flaws like an addiction or financial irresponsibility or some kind of psychological instability. And crucially, they may fail to live up to the career expectations or the financial promises they initially made.
So the partner is either not meeting their required investment threshold, or they're proving to be a net financial or emotional drain on the relationship.
Exactly. And the data is so clear on this. Across incredibly diverse cultures, inadequate economic support from a partner is a consistently cited high-stakes reason for a relationship dissolution, for divorce.
Okay, so that's the first trigger, a decline in the partner's value. What's second?
The second trigger relates to the individual themselves, an increase in their own mate value.
So my stock went up.
Your stock went up. This can be driven by a rise in your status, a significant promotion at work, a financial gain, or even just improved physical health and attractiveness.
And that increase in self-value gives the individual, especially women in the data sets we've seen, the confidence and motivation to seek out a partner who is a commensurate or even higher value match.
Absolutely. They are leveraging their new market position. They are adapting their strategy to their new reality. They feel entitled to and now capable of obtaining a better provider or a higher status partner.
And the third trigger?
The third trigger is simply the arrival of superior alternatives.
So someone better comes along.
Someone better comes along. This means higher value potential mates who were previously unavailable, maybe they were married or geographically distant or you just didn't know they existed, suddenly enter your mating market and become visible.
And today, the digital catalog makes these alternatives far more visible than they ever were ancestrally.
Infinitely more visible. Now, the threshold for switching still has to be met. The new mate has to be incrementally better to offset the social and emotional cost of the breakup. But when that opportunity arises, the adaptive drive is immense.
The motivation is just clear.
Yeah.
Maximizing your genetic or resource advantage over the long term. And when that decision to leave is finalized, the execution is everything.
Everything. And the choice to deploy a vague cliché like, it's not you, it's me, is directly tied to minimizing the consequential risks associated with abandonment.
What kind of consequential risks are we talking about here?
We hypothesize that the vague script is a tactic designed to minimize the costs inflicted by the ejected partner. Primarily, we're talking about rage-motivated vengeance or social sabotage.
So if you're too honest, they might come after you.
Think about it. If you give someone an exhaustive list of their faults, you're a bad friend, a poor lover, and you're lazy, you've just handed them a psychological weapon.
Ammunition.
You've handed them ammunition. By avoiding any specific fault, the initiator minimizes the ammo that the ex could use against them in a moment of fury.
That's a stark way to put it. It's preemptive defense against a weaponized ex. And that defense must extend far into professional and social domains in the modern world.
Oh, absolutely. We see this play out constantly in professional environments where social capital is king.
Like in the Julian example from our research.
Exactly. Julian was a rising architect in London, and he was dating a woman who worked at a highly competitive rival firm. They moved in the exact same tight professional and social circles.
A very risky situation for a breakup.
Extremely. If he had given her a brutally honest, detail-rich breakup, he would have risked intense, targeted social retaliation. She could have tarnished his professional reputation, potentially caused him future collaborations, or even damaged his firm's standing.
So he had to manage his reputation and minimize the blast radius of the breakup. What was his exit strategy?
He chose the most indirect and self-serving script possible. He said, it's not you, it's me. I just need to focus on my career right now. I'm not ready for the level of commitment you deserve.
The classic career excuse.
The classic. By framing the failure as his own personal, non-partner related limitation, his intense focus on his career, he inoculated himself. He ensured his ex had no specific accusatory ammunition to deploy against him within their shared professional sphere.
It was a calculated act of reputation management.
It was. He used the cliché to preserve his crucial social capital. It allowed him to appear virtuous, a dedicated professional while being selfish. And it ensured he remained a desirable cooperator for future mates and business partners.
And this ties directly to another psychological tactic you mentioned, the power of being the ejector.
Yes. In self-report studies, people frequently overclaim responsibility for initiating the breakup. The total amount of perceived responsibility often exceeds 100%.
And why is that?
Because being the ejector signals higher mate value to the social world. It implies agency, control, and that you have other options. The vague script helps orchestrate this perception perfectly. The initiator appears to be the one choosing to leave, the one in control, all while deflecting any specific, potentially damaging blame that could hurt their profile for the next relationship.
So even if the recipient knows deep down it's a lie, the simple fact that the initiator delivered the line first and took that nominal blame is often enough to secure that higher mate value signaling to everyone else. It's public relations executed perfectly. We've established that the low-cost exit is, well, inherently a lie. It's avoidance disguised as kindness. This leads us to the moral conundrum. Why do people choose this specific plausible lie rather than radical honesty or even complete deception like ghosting?
Right. Why this particular lie?
It speaks to a deep human need to maintain an internal image of moral goodness, even when we are pursuing selfish goals.
This takes us into a really fascinating area of behavioral science and evolutionary psychology that's all about self-concept maintenance.
Okay.
Evolutionary theory suggests we possess what are called evolved pro-social preferences.
Meaning?
Simply put, we are wired to value honesty and cooperation because, ancestrally, being a good cooperator was essential for group survival and for your reputation. Honesty exists despite its high opportunity costs, all the benefits we could gain by cheating.
So we have this tension, the adaptive drive to be selfish, like finding a better mate, versus the social drive to be moral, like not hurting your current mate. How do we resolve that internally?
We resolve it using what behavioral economists call the fudge factor.
The fudge factor. I like that.
Experimental data consistently shows that when people cheat, they rarely maximize their gains by lying brazenly. Instead, they stick to small, plausible margins. They'll cheat just enough to reap a material or social benefit, but not so much that they violate their internal threshold of morality.
And not so much that they're easily detected by others.
Exactly. Not so much that they're easily detected by strategically vigilant observers.
So if I find a $10 bill and I know who dropped it, but I keep it, I feel guilty. But if I find a 50-cent coin and keep it, I can easily rationalize that as inconsequential or even as something I deserved.
That's a perfect analogy for the fudge factor. It's the maximum level of dishonesty you can engage in while still maintaining your self-perception as an honest person.
And in the breakup context, it's not you, it's me, perfectly fits this strategy.
Perfectly. It's dishonest, yes, but it's the smallest, most socially acceptable measure of deception possible. It feels like a minor fudge, not a major moral violation.
And that limited lying strategy is driven entirely by the need to protect their internal moral identity.
Absolutely. The desire for maintaining a moral self-concept is highly adaptive. It improves your reputation management without you having to engage in constant, exhausting calculations, what we might call calculated Machiavellianism.
So instead of weighing the long-term reputational cost of every white lie, we just use a simplified internal moral threshold.
We do. And we are highly, highly averse to negatively updating our self-concept. We hate that internal feeling of thinking, I am a bad person.
So the vague breakup script works precisely because it provides an immediate, easily accessible justification for our actions.
Exactly. Internally, the initiator can tell themselves, I wasn't being malicious. I was being kind by protecting their feelings and not listing all their flaws. This internal justification ensures the lie is framed as resulting from a kind intention, not an uncooperative one.
So the agent successfully deceives others, and maybe more importantly, successfully deceives themselves into thinking they're still a good moral cooperator.
Yes, they get the freedom of the exit without the internal moral burden.
That is the core brilliance of the strategy.
It is. Research shows that dishonesty increases dramatically when justifications are readily available. The deployment of the "it's me" script allows the agent to reap all the benefits, the freedom, the efficiency, the emotional safety, while maintaining the crucial image of a good cooperator in the eyes of others. It ensures they remain a highly desirable partner for their next mate.
It is the optimal trade-off, minimizing the emotional and reputational cost of a deeply selfish action. To bring this full circle, let's solidify the differences in the fundamental mating problems faced by men and women. This is what explains the underlying calculus behind these exit strategies and the need for vagueness.
Right, this takes us into sexual strategies theory, or SST.
Which is a foundational framework in the field.
It is. It argues that men and women evolve distinct adaptive mechanisms depending on whether they pursue short-term or long-term mating. And these distinct problems profoundly influence preferences, behaviors, and critically, how and why relationships end.
Okay, let's start with the male short-term strategy. What are the core adaptive problems men face when they're seeking short-term mates, and what are they prioritizing?
When men pursue short-term mating, their adaptive problems really center on partner number reliability and accessibility.
So quantity over quality.
In a sense, yes. Their preferences are geared towards maximizing reproductive success quickly and with minimal investment. This means they prioritize cues to fertility and sexual accessibility. Physical attractiveness is key, and they often value perceived promiscuity in a short-term partner because it signals availability.
And what do they avoid?
Conversely, they are strongly averse to women who display high commitment-seeking behaviors or who signal a lack of loyalty, as that increases the cost and the risk of the interaction. The ultimate goal is direct reproductive success through an increased number of partners.
The female long-term strategy, on the other hand, revolves around the high biological cost of pregnancy and childcare. This means their focus has to be on securing resources and investment, correct?
Absolutely. Women pursuing long-term mating face the adaptive problems of securing sustained commitment and provisioning for themselves and their offspring. Their long-term preferences are laser-focused on traits that signal a willingness and an ability to invest, protect, and provide over a long period.
So they're looking for different cues.
Very different cues. They prioritize traits like good financial prospects, high ambition, status striving, loyalty, and demonstrated good parenting skills. These are all cues that reduce the risk of abandonment and increase the survival rate of offspring.
This fundamental difference, fertility cues versus investment cues, is the engine driving that mate switching we discussed earlier, and the need for a self-protective exit strategy. Now, we have to touch on a framework that attempts to quantify this difference in transactional terms, and we should be clear it's a very controversial one.
Very. It's called sexual economics theory, or SET-T. And it's important we're clear, we're just outlining the theory here, not endorsing it. It's a highly contentious hypothesis criticized heavily by anthropologists and sociologists for what they see as inherent cultural bias.
Okay, so with that caveat, what does the theory propose?
The theory posits that sex operates like a marketplace deal, where women are hypothesized to hold sexuality as a resource, which is then exchanged for male resources, things like commitment, time, and financial provisioning.
So in this framework, the relationship ending is literally viewed as canceling a transactional contract because one side or the other is no longer providing the agreed-upon resources.
That's the interpretation. Proponents of SET claim this marketplace dynamic perfectly explains the modern search for low-cost exit strategies because people are just trying to terminate a bad contract efficiently. The core maxim of SET is that female sexuality is the resource that is scarce and desired, leading to a bargaining dynamic where women hold out until a man offers a sufficiently attractive long-term commitment or resource package.
What kind of examples do proponents even use to try and support this highly transactional view?
They often point to extreme, high-stakes social phenomena. This would include the overrepresentation of women as victims in sex trafficking and sexual harassment, and the existence of things like virginity auctions, where the person selling their virginity is often a young woman seeking immediate, substantial financial capital.
So they use these extreme examples to argue that female sexuality is a measurable, valuable commodity.
Exactly. That it's exchanged for financial capital or social resources. But, as we noted, the criticism of this theory is massive. We have to be really clear on the counter-arguments here.
Please lay them out.
The criticism's profound. Critics argue that SET is an outmoded fringe theory that's based on outdated Western industrialized stereotypes of gender that simply fail to replicate cross-culturally.
So it's not a human universal.
Far from it. They contend that the phenomena cited like trafficking and harassment reflect institutionalized patriarchy, wealth disparity, and systemic oppression, not universal biological drives. They point to extensive cross-cultural data from non-patriarchal societies, like certain matrilineal or foraging groups, which often show far greater sexual egalitarianism.
In what way?
In some of these societies, you see higher female libido and much less focus on male resource provisioning, which directly contradicts the core premises of SET.
So while the economic model might describe the transactional behavior we see in certain modern, capitalist, and heavily gender-stereotyped Western societies, it's likely describing a cultural adaptation to patriarchy, not a biological universal mating truth.
That is the consensus among the critics, absolutely. Furthermore, the heavy reliance of proponents on self-report surveys from weird societies, that's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, is seen as fundamentally flawed.
Why flawed?
People in these cultures are highly susceptible to social desirability bias, especially when talking about sex. Men tend to inflate their partner numbers, and women often underreport due to cultural conditioning, making the quantitative data unreliable for establishing universal biological differences. Human mating complexities simply cannot be reduced to such a simple, universal marketplace contract.
So this deep dive has really shown us that the phrase, "it's not you, it's me," is anything but a simple failure of communication.
On the contrary, it's a highly successful, highly evolved mechanism for self-preservation.
It's the perfect script for navigating the competitive, high-volume environment of modern relationships.
It is. The individual can efficiently abandon a partner while successfully managing their reputation, both externally, ensuring they remain a desirable future mate, and internally, maintaining their self-concept as a moral person through the strategic use of that easily justifiable fudge factor lie.
The ultimate objective for the leaver, whether they're driven by emotional avoidance, market efficiency, or evolutionary mate switching, is always a clean, cost-minimized exit.
The words may be vague, but their underlying function is crystal clear. In the complex market of human connection, the ultimate objective is self-preservation at the lowest possible emotional and social cost.